I suppose that brings in what you're saying about cognition and stuff, and that sort of thing, thinking and feelings coming into play.
Absolutely.
That's good. Okay, well, we've gone through a few of the questions there, and that's fine. I mean,
I will just rant.
That's absolutely fine. Okay, I suppose, I think I've got an idea of where you think interpretation coming from and what you see it as. So I suppose I'd want to think a wee bit about the growth of interpretation, what it's for. So I've got a few questions here to do with that. What specific social, environmental, or economic issues do you feel interpretation can touch upon successful?
Right. I mean, again, this goes back to the early days in a sense, because a lot of interpretation was not only had educational goals, but it had economic goals as well, looking at sort of regeneration of rundown areas, economically declining areas, and so on. I suppose one of the issues for me, I started, my first area of work was looking at evaluation. I not only did evaluation in those two studies that I mentioned, but I did a lot of work in museums as well, looking at exhibitions there. But if you like, the second phase was when I did consultancy work. And at what premised, if you like, that the end of my consultancy phase was I became very concerned that interpretation was being swallowed up by the tourism industry in a way. Swallowed up, yes, I mean, I guess it's always part of tourism, but it became, I suppose in a way, I think it became very commercial. One saw all sorts of attractions being opened that used interpretive techniques, but it was nothing to do with the promotion of conservation or the awe and wonder of the wilderness areas or any of those kind of things. It was basically to try and take money off people.
Okay.
And, okay, that's fine, no problem with that. But I just started to have worries about that in a way.
Right.
So I think, like most things in life, there's been a strong economic dimension to it.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose where I'm living with this question almost is, I'm saying, I've said, what do you think, interpretation can do in these sort of areas? And where I'd really want you to go to is there anything you think interpretation can't do or shouldn't touch? Do you think there's issues it shouldn't touch?
No, I don't. Gosh, I can't think of them. I mean, some of you out there may have read the stuff that I've written on war and conflict, and that really came about because, and the story is very much like it is in the chapter in the Heritage Interpretation book. The sequence of it was, I went to a Scottish, as it happened, battlefield site. And there was a visitor centre there and all of that, and I went in the visitor centre and then I came out. I can't remember the name of it now, but probably that's a good thing. And I walked around the site, then walked back to the car, and I suddenly realised I felt absolutely nothing.
Right.
And yet here was a place that, hundreds, thousands of people had died.
Yeah.
Really important to national identity, etc.,
etc.
etc. And for me, it just had no resonance whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then I went to the places that I mentioned in the chapter, Oradour-sur-Glane in France. And there was a very different approach altogether. There they were looking for they were cultivating an emotional response. And you came away feeling sad and angry and all of those sorts of things. And again, I went to the Berlin Wall when that was there, and the house at Checkpoint Charlie, and the museum there was terrible. It was awful. I mean, if you were to put it up for an award scheme, or if it was part of a course evaluation, you would say it was dreadful because the fonts were all the wrong size. It was just wall-to-wall text and pictures, but the power of the story
Yeah.
was just phenomenal. You just couldn't take your eyes away from all this material, these
Yeah.
objects, stories, blah blah blah. And I went in there thinking, oh well, it's a tourism thing. I'll go in there before I go across into East Berlin. Half an hour, I don't want to spend any longer in there. I was there an hour and a half, 2 hours. I couldn't leave.
Yeah.
And again, you felt, anger, sadness, hope, despair, all those kind of things. And it made me realise that, there's a lot of interpretation. I know I'm slightly deviating from your question, but I'm very cleverly going to bring it back. I realised that a lot of interpretation, certainly in this country, and I don't think it's only in this country, lack that kind of dimension to it. Having looked at war and conflict and all that, I tried to make the case very briefly in the chapter. In a sense, there's all sorts of areas that we ought to be eliciting an emotional response. Destruction of wildlife and wild places, and all of these kind of things. Going back to your question, is there anything that interpretation shouldn't look at? In terms of the environment, I don't think so, and least of all now when we've got issues of climate change and the global impacts of some of these things. At one level, and it goes back to an earlier question, in a sense, interpretation is about communication. It's also about a set of techniques, and so one could apply the techniques to whole manner of things. Maybe there is a case for using interpretive techniques in relation to health.
Right.
Or in relation to understanding the economy. How many people really understand the economy?
Yeah.
Very few of
Yeah.
us. I think if you get interpretive, if you go on a very good course like this, and you come away with a really good understanding of interpretive planning, processes, techniques, you can then use those skills and those methods, so on, in a whole variety of fields.
Yeah. And that's